Richard John Wershe Jr., known to the public as White Boy Rick, has filed a $100 million lawsuit against the Detroit police and the FBI for what he calls law enforcement child abuse. What he means is it was abusive for the FBI and the Detroit police to recruit him and use him as a 14-year-old drug informant in the mid-1980s. What happened to Rick Wershe Jr. is a miscarriage of justice of epic proportions. But his lawsuit may be a miscarriage of justice too, because parts of it aren't true. Wershe is starting to revise the story of his life based on the Hollywood version of himself and his late father. Prediction: Rick Wershe Jr. is going to regret it.
It contains misstatements of facts and self-serving revisionist history closer to the Hollywood version of his life instead of his real life. The top of the first page is an error because one of the named defendants is deceased. James Dixon, an FBI special agent, passed away in 2018. So-called due diligence would have avoided this blunder. To describe James Dixon's role, it's necessary to describe how Rick Wershe became a paid FBI snitch. In the 1980s, when the FBI started working drug investigations, William Don Tisby, a Detroit black agent, was sent undercover to gather intelligence from Detroit's nighttime bar scene. It was where the dope dealers hung out. Tisby zeroed in on the Currys because they reputedly had political connections. Tisby found out there was a young white kid hanging out with them. He passed the intel to the FBI's new drug squad. At about this time, Richard Wershe Sr. called the Detroit FBI for help with his drug-addicted daughter, Dawn. He knew some FBI agents because he worked for a time at a local gun shop. How Rick Wershe Jr. was recruited as a paid FBI drug informant is a key point where the lawsuit misstates the facts and the truth. The lawsuit says he met Special Agent Dixon with his father at a McDonald's restaurant where Wershe Sr. wanted to ask for help with his addicted daughter. This is not what happened. Rick didn't first meet FBI agents in a chance meeting at a fast food joint. Rick's first encounter with the FBI was at his own residence. This was confirmed by Dixon, by his father, Richard Wershe Sr., and by Rick himself in his testimony before the Michigan Parole Board. In September 2014, a now-defunct magazine called The Atavist did the first serious story about young Rick Wershe called The Trials of White Boy Rick. Evan Hughes reported that Richard Wershe Sr. told him a team of FBI agents came to the Wershe residence with surveillance photos and asked for help identifying the individuals in the pics. Wershe Sr. didn't know who they were, but Wershe Jr. did, and that launched the kid's career as a paid FBI informant.
I wrote a book about Rick Wershe's story as part of the larger saga of the failed war on drugs. Prisoner of War, the story of White Boy Rick and the war on drugs, is based on a lot of research and a lot of interviews. I interviewed Rick Wershe extensively through letters and by telephone.
Rick must have forgotten. He told me the same story from prison about his FBI recruitment that his now-deceased father told the Atavist. It was the same story I heard from the late Jim Dixon, the FBI agent who recruited Rick, along with another FBI agent, Al Finch. I interviewed Dixon in person before he passed away. We will hear what Dixon has to say in a moment. But Rick has another problem with his revisionist tale of his FBI recruitment. The story in his lawsuit is not what he told the Michigan Parole Board under oath in 2017. At his parole hearing, Rick Wershe testified, "They came to our house the first time, and they had photos. And then they asked my dad, who was this, and my dad told them, I don't know. I was upstairs, and one of the agents told my dad, well, your son knows." Assistant State Attorney General Rothermel asked Wershe, "So does your dad call you down?" Wershe, "Yes, sir." Rothermel, "Okay, so he calls you down. And what happens next?" Wershe, "I looked at some of the photos, and I told them who they were." Rick Wershe's lawsuit portrays him as a frightened child doing what the FBI and Detroit police ordered him to do. Jim Dixon, the late FBI agent, says it wasn't like that at all. I interviewed Dixon in a coffee shop, and his voice was clear over the background noise.
He always was eager to talk, and especially after they started getting money, he would come in with all kinds of information, and he would do, like I say, most of the talking at those meetings, and he seemed very creditable when I talked to him, when we talked to him. His dad was pushing him to provide that information.
His dad was what?
Pushing him, yeah.
What,
his dad would say...
To get information?
Yeah, to get information,
For the money?
Yeah, for the money. His dad was interested in money.
The FBI was willing to pay cash for information about the Curry drug gang, and they did. Rick Wershe didn't mention to the parole board that he was a frightened kid intimidated by the FBI and the police. Rick thought working secretly for law enforcement was cool, and Rick was interested in the money, too. Very interested. That's what he told the parole board in 2017. Wershe: to be honest with you, in the beginning, I was a kid. I thought it was cool. I was working for the police. Rothermel: is that what drew you to this, or drew you and kept you in at the beginning? Wershe: that and the money.
It always came down to the money, I think, as far as Senior was involved. He was more interested in the money. I don't think he was looking at the safety of his son or anything like that, And we didn't push it, and I guess that's because we wanted information, so...
The FBI's dirty secret about the informant, known as Richard J. Wershe, was that the Wershe listed in the FBI files as a paid drug informant wasn't the real snitch. It was his son, Richard J. Wershe, Jr. The FBI used the junior-senior same-name coincidence as cover for using a teenage informant. In truth, Richard Wershe, Sr. knew nothing about the Detroit drug scene.
Whatever information he had, it was provided by his son. I mean, he might say something, but he would indicate that, Junior told him this or something like that. Yeah. No, he really didn't have any information.
Many news outlets, including the Washington Post, reported on Wershe's lawsuit. The Post reporter led his story with Rick's tale of a kid being recruited to be an FBI drug snitch in a McDonald's restaurant. Regarding that disputed McDonald's restaurant encounter, Dixon says there was a meeting at a McDonald's on the west side, but it was almost a year after Rick Wershe's recruitment as an informant. It was the location of the introduction of fellow agent Herman Groman to the Wershes, because the case had been reassigned from Dixon to Groman. Retired agent Groman told me when he first saw Rick Wershe, he thought he was meeting the 1950s kid show puppet Howdy Doody.
Herman and I walked in. They were already there in a booth, and I introduced them at that time.
The lawsuit tries to portray Rick Wershe as some kind of innocent who knew about the Curry brothers through neighborhood gossip. That's not what Rick Wershe told the Michigan Parole Board. In a discussion of the Curry drug gang, Rick Wershe testified at his parole hearing that he got to know all of the Curry brothers by playing basketball at the neighborhood recreation center with Rudell Curry, the youngest of the brothers. Wershe: Rudell Curry I had become pretty good friends with. Rothermel, referring to the Curry brothers, asked, and you know who they were and what they did, right? Wershe: absolutely.
Did Rick Wershe lie in his lawsuit, or did he lie to the Michigan Parole Board in 2017?
Rick Wershe's lawsuit contains other untruths and questionable assertions. For example, the lawsuit describes an episode where hitmen attempted to kill white boy Rick while he was a passenger in a car at a traffic light. The suit identifies the driver as a friend of Wershe, first name Roy, last name unknown. Roy is Roy Grissom, a fringe member of the Curry gang, who was one of Rick Wershe's good friends. I took a picture of Grissom standing in front of a condo Rick shared for a time with Kathy Volson, then Mayor Coleman Young's niece. I found Grissom with Wershe's help from prison. Yet now he asserts he doesn't remember Roy's last name. Finally, in announcing his lawsuit, Rick Wershe complained bitterly about media misstatements and lies about his late father. He may be confusing his deceased real father with the version portrayed by Matthew McConaughey in the movie White Boy Rick. The real Richard Wershe Sr. was willing to put his son in danger for FBI cash. The real Richard Wershe Sr. was a domestic abuser who once threw his wife out of the house and locked her out in the snow while she was barefoot and in a nightie. The Wershes divorced, largely due to domestic violence. There are numerous domestic violence arrests and convictions of Richard Wershe Sr. in the archives of the police in Roseville and St. Clair Shores. In one incident, he was arrested for choking his grandson because the kid didn't bring groceries from the car into the house. Apparently, Rick has forgotten he moved out of his father's house and lived with his mother for a year because he couldn't take his father's abuse.
A famous writer named Virginia Woolf said, "If you do not tell the truth about yourself, you cannot tell the truth about other people." Rick Wershe's lawsuit shows he hasn't learned that lesson. I'm Vince Wade.